How dare you speak to me that way? Do you have any idea who I am? Every head in Spago Beverly Hills turned at once. All eyes landed on the furious blonde woman towering over a table where a young black woman sat in a simple red dress. Patricia Hartwell's manicured finger pointed accusingly, her voice dripping with entitlement. I will not be insulted by some cheap, classless nobody. Her hand flew through the air with vicious speed. Slap. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Some diners gasped, others pulled out their phones to record. Who is she? Someone whispered. Probably lost or something. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, but Celeste Williams didn't flinch. In that instant, Patricia had just made the biggest mistake of her life that would destroy her entire world in the next 60 seconds. Celeste sat perfectly still, her dark eyes calm as a lake before a storm. Her natural hair was styled in elegant curls that framed her beautiful face. She wore minimal makeup, letting her natural beauty shine through. The red dress she chose was simple but perfectly tailored, showing off her graceful figure. She looked like she belonged in this expensive restaurant, even though Patricia was treating her like an intruder. Ma'am, is there a problem here? The restaurant manager rushed over, his face red with embarrassment. The whole scene was unfolding in front of his best customers. Patricia turned to him with a satisfied smile, expecting him to remove Celeste from the restaurant. Yes, there is a problem, Patricia said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. This woman doesn't belong here. She's clearly lost or confused. Maybe she should try McDonald's instead. More phones came out to record. Patricia was loving the attention, thinking she was putting someone in their place. Celeste finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. I'm sorry you feel that way, Patricia. Her tone was so polite and controlled that it made Patricia even angrier. How dare this woman use her first name? How did she even know who she was? Don't you dare speak to me like you know me. Patricia screamed, causing nearby tables to stop eating entirely. You have no right to be in the same space as me. Do you know who my boyfriend is? Richard Williams owns half of Silicon Valley. The words hung in the air like poison. Celeste tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Several people in the restaurant started whispering among themselves. Some recognized the name Richard Williams. A few tech reporters were already typing on their phones. Richard Williams? Celeste repeated thoughtfully. Yes, I know him very well. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, completely ignoring Patricia's rage. In fact, let me call him right now. Patricia's face went white for just a second, then turned red again. You're lying. There's no way someone like you knows Richard. He has better taste than that. She turned to the growing crowd of onlookers. This woman is clearly disturbed. Someone should call security. But Celeste was already dialing. The phone rang twice before a man's voice answered. She put it on speaker so everyone could hear. Richard, darling, I'm at Spago having dinner. There's someone here who says she knows you very well. Her name is Patricia Hartwell. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Finally, Richard's voice cracked through the speaker, shaky and confused. Celeste? What are you doing there? How do you know Patricia? The restaurant went completely quiet. Patricia looked like she had seen a ghost. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The phone slipped slightly in Celeste's steady hand, but her smile never wavered. Oh, I think I'm starting to understand, Celeste said into the phone. Patricia has been very entertaining tonight. She seems to think I don't belong in nice places. She even slapped me. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. She did what? Richard's voice exploded through the speaker. Patricia, are you insane? Patricia grabbed for the phone, but Celeste moved it away smoothly. Richard, I can explain. Explain what? Celeste interrupted, her voice still sweet but with an edge that made everyone lean in closer. Explain why your girlfriend just assaulted your wife in front of 50 witnesses and a dozen cameras. The word wife hit the restaurant like a bomb. Phones that weren't already recording started recording. Patricia stumbled backward, knocking into an empty chair. The confident, entitled woman from moments before was gone. In her place stood someone who looked terrified and small. Wife? Patricia whispered. You're married? Celeste stood up slowly, with the grace of a queen rising from her throne. She was taller than Patricia had expected, and in that red dress she looked powerful and untouchable. Mrs. Celeste Williams, she said, extending her hand like she was meeting Patricia for the first time. Pleasure to finally meet my husband's friend. The manager who had rushed over earlier was now backing away, realizing he was witnessing something much bigger than a simple restaurant dispute. Other diners were pulling out business cards and calling contacts, recognizing they were seeing the start of what would be a major scandal. Patricia tried to speak, but only squeaks came out. Celeste picked up her purse and checked her watch. Well, this has been educational. Patricia, I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other very soon. Her smile was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. As Celeste walked toward the exit, every eye in the restaurant followed her. She moved like she owned the place, which, as several tech journalists were already discovering, she actually did. The final piece of the puzzle that would destroy Patricia's world was about to fall into place. Patricia stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, surrounded by recording phones and judging stares, realizing that in 60 seconds of rage, she had just signed her own destruction warrant. 3 months earlier, Celeste Williams sat in her home office, staring at credit card statements that made no sense. Richard said he was working late again, but the charges told a different story. Expensive dinners for 2. Hotel rooms. Jewelry purchases she never received. Her husband of 5 years was lying to her. She had built the software that made Richard rich. While he was the face of Williams Tech, glad handing investors and making deals, Celeste was the brain behind every major breakthrough. She had the patents, the original code, the vision that turned a small startup into a billion-dollar empire. But somewhere along the way, Richard had started believing his own press. Celeste was only 28, but she had already revolutionized 3 different industries with her innovations. She had started coding when she was 12, building apps that solved real problems. By 25, she had created the security software that every major bank used. Richard had been her business partner first, then her husband. She thought they were a team. The first sign something was wrong came 6 months ago. Richard started staying out later, taking mysterious phone calls and showing less interest in their business. He used to ask her opinion on everything. Lately, he made decisions without even telling her. When she asked about it, he said she was being paranoid. "You're so smart with computers," he had said, "but you don't understand people like I do. Let me handle the business side." It hurt, but she trusted him. She focused on developing new software while he managed the company operations. She didn't realize he was managing more than just business. The credit card statements were just the beginning. Celeste's assistant, Nicole, had noticed things too. Nicole had worked for Celeste for 3 years and was fiercely loyal. She was a young black woman from the same neighborhood where Celeste grew up. Nicole understood what it meant to have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. "Mrs. Williams," Nicole had said carefully one day, "I think you should look at these expense reports." She handed over a stack of papers with highlighted sections. "Some of these charges don't match any meetings on Mr. Williams' calendar." That's when Celeste hired the private investigator. James Crawford was recommended by her lawyer, a quiet man who specialized in tracking down digital footprints. He was expensive, but Celeste had learned that when you needed real information, you paid for the best. The pictures James brought her 3 weeks later made everything clear. Richard entering a hotel with a tall blonde woman. The same woman getting into his car. The same woman wearing the diamond bracelet that Celeste thought Richard had bought for her birthday, until it never appeared. "Her name is Patricia Hartwell," James had explained. 26 years old, works as a marketing coordinator at Prestige Properties. She's been seeing your husband for about 8 months. He's been paying her rent, buying her clothes and taking her on trips. Celeste studied the photos with the same analytical mind she used to solve coding problems. This wasn't just an affair. This was a complete second life Richard had built. He had been using their joint accounts to fund it. Money that came from her innovations, her patents, her work was being used to betray her. "There's more," James continued. "She's been telling people that Richard is going to leave you for her. She's been bragging about it at work, saying she's going to be the wife of a tech billionaire soon." That night, Celeste lay awake next to Richard watching him sleep. He looked peaceful, like a man with no secrets. When he woke up in the morning, he kissed her forehead like he always did and asked about her day like he cared. The performance was perfect. Over the next month, Celeste did what she did best. She planned. She reviewed every contract, every patent, every business agreement. She consulted with her lawyer about her options. She discovered that Richard had been making some very questionable financial decisions with their shared assets. "The good news," her lawyer explained, "is that all the core patents and original software code are in your name. You can't touch those. The bad news is that he's been using company funds for personal expenses without board approval. That's a serious problem." Celeste also learned that Patricia had been stealing from her own company. Small amounts at first, but getting bolder. She had been skimming money from client accounts, thinking no one would notice. James had uncovered a paper trail that would make any prosecutor very interested. The plan started forming in Celeste's mind. Richard and Patricia thought they were so clever, sneaking around behind her back. They thought she was too focused on her work to notice. They thought she was just the quiet genius who stayed in the background while Richard took all the credit. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Celeste spent weeks setting up the perfect trap. She knew Patricia's schedule, her favorite restaurants, her habits. She knew Richard's patterns too, when he lied about working late to meet his girlfriend. She knew exactly how to put them both in a position where their own actions would destroy them. The restaurant scene would be just the beginning. By the time Celeste was finished, Patricia and Richard would understand that you don't betray the person who built your entire world. They would learn that behind every successful man was often a woman who could destroy him if he crossed her. Celeste wasn't just planning revenge. She was planning justice. And she was very, very good at getting what she planned for. Mrs. Williams, you're going to want to see this. James Crawford spread a folder full of documents across Celeste's desk. It had been 6 weeks since she hired him, and the information he'd gathered was more damaging than she had imagined. Patricia Hartwell isn't just sleeping with your husband, James explained, pointing to bank statements and receipts. She's been stealing money from her own company for over a year. Small amounts at first, maybe $500 here and there. But in the last few months, she's taken over $30,000. Celeste studied the evidence. Patricia had been careful, moving money between accounts and covering her tracks. But she wasn't as smart as she thought she was. There were patterns, digital footprints that James had followed like breadcrumbs. How did you get all this? Celeste asked. Her ex-boyfriend works in accounting at Prestige Properties. When he found out she was cheating on him with a married man, he decided to do some digging. He found irregularities in client accounts and made copies before reporting them to management. The irony wasn't lost on Celeste. Patricia had betrayed one man to be with another, and now the first betrayal was coming back to haunt her. Karma had a sense of humor. There's more, James continued. Your husband has been using company credit cards for personal expenses. The hotel rooms, the dinners, the jewelry for Patricia, all of it charged to Williams Tech. That's embezzlement, Mrs. Williams. Celeste felt a cold anger settle in her chest. It was one thing to cheat on her personally. It was another thing to steal from the company she had built with her own hands. Richard wasn't just betraying their marriage. He was betraying everything they had worked for together. I need you to document everything, she told James. Every transaction, every meeting, every lie. I want a complete timeline of their relationship and every illegal thing they've done. Over the next 2 weeks, the picture became even clearer. Richard had been forging Celeste's signature on some business documents. He had been making promises to investors without her knowledge. He had been selling company assets and keeping the money for himself. Patricia, meanwhile, had been living beyond her means for months. The apartment Richard paid for was in her name, but she had been subletting it to other people and keeping the rent money. She had been selling some of the gifts Richard bought her and pocketing the cash. She was greedier than either of them realized. Nicole helped Celeste gather more evidence from inside their own company. As Celeste's assistant, Nicole had access to financial records and meeting notes that painted a clear picture of Richard's misconduct. He's been telling investors that you're stepping back from active management, Nicole reported. He's been positioning himself as the sole decision maker for Williams Tech. Some of the newer investors don't even know you exist. That was the final insult. Celeste had created the technology that made their company valuable. Her software innovations were the reason Williams Tech was worth nearly $2 billion. And Richard was trying to erase her from the story completely. Celeste made copies of everything. Financial records, patent documents, email communications, security camera footage from their office building showing Richard taking documents from her private files. She stored everything in multiple locations, including a safety deposit box that only she could access. She also started quietly reaching out to key investors and clients, reminding them of her role in the company's success. Many of them had worked directly with Celeste on technical issues and knew that she was the real genius behind Williams Tech. I'm concerned about some irregularities in our financial reporting, she told Robert Chin, their biggest investor. I think we need to schedule a board meeting to review recent expenditures. Robert was immediately interested. He had invested $50 million in Williams Tech specifically because of Celeste's innovations. If there were financial problems, he wanted to know about them immediately. The web was closing around Richard and Patricia, but they were too busy with their affair to notice. They thought they were being so careful, so clever. They had no idea that every move they made was being documented and prepared for use against them. Celeste also consulted with a criminal lawyer, separate from the corporate attorney who handled Williams' tech business. The criminal lawyer was very interested in the evidence of embezzlement and fraud. "This is a strong case," the lawyer told her. "Both of them could face serious jail time if the prosecutor decides to pursue charges. The amounts involved are substantial enough to make this a felony." Everything was falling into place. Celeste had always been a planner, someone who thought through every possibility before acting. This situation was no different. She was treating it like a complex coding project, breaking it down into steps and executing each one perfectly. The restaurant confrontation was scheduled for the following week. Celeste had learned that Patricia liked to eat at Spago on Friday nights, usually alone while Richard was at his weekly poker game with business associates. It was the perfect setting for a public confrontation. Patricia had no idea that she was walking into a carefully planned trap. She thought she was winning, stealing another woman's husband and living the high life. She was about to learn that some women fight back harder than others. Celeste looked at all the evidence spread across her desk and smiled. She had built a case that would destroy both Richard and Patricia completely. They had made the mistake of thinking she was weak. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The Friday night before the restaurant confrontation, Celeste sat in her home office putting the finishing touches on her plan. Every detail had been carefully considered, every possible outcome mapped out like a complex algorithm. Tomorrow, Patricia Hartwell would walk into the most expensive mistake of her life. Celeste had spent 2 weeks learning Patricia's routine. The blonde woman was predictable in her habits, especially on Friday nights. She always went to Spago Beverly Hills at 8:30, always requested the same table near the window where she could see and be seen. Patricia loved attention, loved feeling important and glamorous. "Nicole," Celeste called her assistant. "Are you sure about the timing?" "Positive, Mrs. Williams." Patricia made a reservation for 8:30. Richard's poker game starts at 9 and usually runs until after midnight. "He won't even know you're gone." Celeste had told Richard she was staying home with a headache. He had barely looked up from his phone when she mentioned it, probably texting Patricia about their weekend plans. The lies came so easily to him now that Celeste wondered if he even remembered what truth looked like. The restaurant reservation was booked under a fake name, a table positioned perfectly to create maximum drama when Patricia arrived. Celeste had even called in a favor with a food blogger she knew, suggesting they visit Spago that particular Friday night to review the new menu. She wanted plenty of witnesses with cameras when everything went down. James Crawford had confirmed that Patricia would be alone. She always ate by herself on Fridays, ordering expensive wine and making phone calls to her friends, bragging about her lifestyle and her mysterious billionaire boyfriend. Tonight, she would get the attention she craved, but not the kind she expected. Celeste chose her outfit carefully. The red dress was simple but striking, elegant without being flashy. She wanted to look like she belonged in an expensive restaurant, but not so glamorous that she would overshadow what was about to happen. Her jewelry was minimal, just her wedding ring and simple earrings. She wanted Patricia to underestimate her at first glance. Her hair was styled in natural curls, framing her face in a way that emphasized her beauty without looking overdone. Celeste had always been stunning, but she usually dressed down for work, focusing on function over fashion. Tonight was different. Tonight she needed to look like the successful businesswoman she was. At 7:45, Celeste arrived at Spago and was seated at her table. She ordered a glass of white wine and opened her laptop, making it look like she was working. To anyone watching, she appeared to be a professional woman having a quiet dinner alone. Patricia would see exactly what Celeste wanted her to see, someone who looked out of place and easy to intimidate. Nicole had provided the final piece of the puzzle earlier that day. Patricia had been bragging to her coworkers about having dinner at Spago, mentioning that she might run into some important people who could help her career. She was looking for opportunities to make connections, to network her way into higher social circles. When Patricia saw a black woman sitting alone at what she probably considered her restaurant, she would see an opportunity to assert her dominance. Patricia had always been the type of person who put others down to make herself feel better. Tonight, that personality flaw would be her downfall. Celeste's phone buzzed with a text from James, "Target en route. 88 minutes." Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. At 8:28, Patricia Hartwell walked into Spago Beverly Hills like she owned the place. She wore a tight white dress that was inappropriate for the restaurant's dress code, but expensive enough that the hostess didn't say anything. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, and she carried a designer handbag that Celeste recognized as one Richard had bought with company funds. Patricia scanned the dining room as she was led to her table, her eyes stopping on Celeste's table with a look of confusion and mild annoyance. Celeste could practically read her thoughts. What is she doing here? She doesn't belong in a place like this. For the next 15 minutes, Celeste watched Patricia out of the corner of her eye. The blonde woman kept glancing over, her irritation growing more obvious with each look. She made several phone calls, speaking loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear her dropping names and talking about her connections. Finally, Patricia stood up and walked over to Celeste's table. Her face was flushed with wine and self-righteous anger. This was the moment Celeste had been waiting for. "Excuse me," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "I think there might be some confusion. This restaurant has a dress code." Celeste looked up from her laptop with an expression of innocent surprise. "I'm sorry, is there a problem?" "Well, it's just that this is a very exclusive establishment. Maybe you would be more comfortable somewhere else." Perfect. Patricia was following the script exactly as Celeste had predicted. The racist assumptions, the entitlement, the public confrontation, everything was proceeding exactly as planned. "I'm quite comfortable here, thank you," Celeste replied politely. "Is there something specific I can help you with?" That's when Patricia's mask slipped completely. The fake politeness disappeared, replaced by raw anger and prejudice. She raised her voice, ensuring everyone in the restaurant would hear what happened next. And when Patricia's hand flew through the air and connected with Celeste's cheek, every camera in the restaurant was ready to capture the moment that would destroy Patricia's life forever. The slap was the signal Celeste had been waiting for. Now the real plan could begin. The sound of Patricia's slap still echoed in the restaurant as Celeste calmly picked up her phone and made the first call that would destroy both Patricia and Richard's lives. But the call to Richard was just for show. The real work had already begun before Patricia even sat down for dinner. "Nicole," Celeste had texted her assistant 30 minutes earlier, "activate everything." While Patricia was making her dramatic scene, Nicole was in the Williams Tech office executing phase 1 of Celeste's plan. As Celeste's assistant, Nicole had access to all the company's financial systems. She began transferring funds from accounts that Richard controlled into secure accounts that only Celeste could access. Every transfer was completely legal. Celeste had reviewed every contract and partnership agreement with her lawyers. The money being moved belonged to her company, generated by her patents and innovations. Richard had been using it illegally for months. Now she was simply taking back what was rightfully hers. By the time Celeste left the restaurant, $47 million had been moved into accounts that Richard couldn't touch. His corporate credit cards were frozen. His access to company funds was revoked. Nicole had also sent copies of all the evidence of Richard's embezzlement to the company's board of directors and their primary investors. Celeste drove home calmly, knowing that Richard's phone was probably exploding with calls and messages. She had timed everything perfectly. By the time he finished his poker game and checked his messages, his entire world would have collapsed. Meanwhile, Nicole was executing phase 2. She called the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and arranged to deliver copies of all the evidence James Crawford had gathered. Bank records, forged documents, proof of embezzlement, everything was handed over to federal investigators who were very interested in prosecuting financial fraud. Patricia's assault had been captured on at least 12 different phones and cameras. Nicole made sure that copies of the video were sent to Patricia's employer, her apartment manager, and local news stations. By midnight, the hashtag restaurant slap was trending on social media. The video showed exactly what Celeste wanted it to show: an entitled white woman attacking an innocent black woman in an expensive restaurant. The racial dynamics were impossible to ignore, and public opinion immediately sided with Celeste. Comments poured in supporting her and condemning Patricia's behavior. When Richard finally came home at 1:15 in the morning, Celeste was waiting for him in their living room. She sat in her favorite chair, wearing comfortable clothes, looking completely relaxed. The contrast with his panicked appearance was striking. "Celeste, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his phone still buzzing with calls. "My accounts are frozen. The board is calling emergency meetings. And what's this about Patricia assaulting you?" "Sit down, Richard," Celeste said calmly. "We need to talk." He remained standing, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "This is insane. You can't just freeze company assets without board approval." "Actually, I can," Celeste replied. "I am the majority shareholder of Williams Tech. I own 68% of the company stock. You seem to have forgotten that." She pulled out a folder full of documents. "I also have evidence of your embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of company funds." Richard's face went white. "That's impossible. You don't have access to those records." I have access to everything, Richard. I built this company. I created every piece of software that makes us money. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when you started stealing from me? She opened the folder and began reading from James Crawford's report. 47 unauthorized charges to company credit cards. Forged signatures on contracts worth $12 million. Unauthorized sale of company assets totaling $8.3 million. With each item she read, Richard seemed to shrink a little more. The confident, charismatic man who had been lying to her for months was disappearing, replaced by someone who looked scared and desperate. You can't prove any of that, he said weakly. I already have proven it. The FBI has copies of everything. So do our investors and board members. So do 3 different news organizations. Celeste smiled. Your girlfriend's little performance tonight was the perfect cover for everything else I had planned. Richard finally sat down, his head in his hands. Patricia didn't mean to cause trouble. She was just defending your honor? Celeste finished. How romantic. Too bad she's going to jail for assault and theft. Did you know she's been stealing from her own company? The FBI is very interested in that too. The full scope of his situation was finally hitting Richard. He looked up at Celeste with something that might have been respect, if he hadn't been too terrified to feel anything but panic. What do you want? He asked. I want a divorce, Celeste said simply. I want you out of my company and out of my life. And I want you to face the consequences of your actions. She stood up and walked toward the stairs, leaving him sitting alone with the wreckage of his life scattered around him. Tomorrow the real consequences would begin. Tonight was just the opening move in a game that Richard had lost the moment he decided to betray the woman who made him successful. As she climbed the stairs to what used to be their bedroom, Celeste felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since discovering Richard's affair, she was in complete control of her own life again. By Monday morning, the video of Patricia slapping Celeste had been viewed over 2 million times. News outlets across the country were picking up the story, and not just because of the dramatic restaurant scene. Investigative reporters had started digging into the background of everyone involved, and what they found was explosive. Tech billionaire's wife assaulted by husband's mistress, read the headline in the San Francisco Chronicle. FBI investigating financial fraud at Williams Tech, announced the Wall Street Journal. The real story behind the Beverly Hills restaurant attack was trending on every social media platform. Celeste sat in her office watching the news coverage with Nicole and her legal team. Her lawyer, Amanda Foster, was briefing her on the latest developments. Patricia Hartwell was arrested this morning on charges of assault and embezzlement, Amanda reported. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she can't afford since her assets have been frozen. She's currently sitting in county jail. Nicole pulled up Patricia's social media accounts on her laptop. She deleted everything but not before we made screenshots. Look at this post from last week. She showed Celeste a photo of Patricia wearing the diamond bracelet Richard had bought her, captioned with, "Living my best life with my billionaire boo." The irony was perfect. Patricia had been bragging about her relationship with Richard on social media, providing a clear timeline of their affair and evidence of the expensive gifts he'd been buying her with stolen money. What about Richard? Celeste asked. He's hired a criminal defense lawyer, Amanda replied. The FBI raided Williams Tech headquarters this morning and seized financial records. Richard is facing federal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. His lawyer is trying to work out a plea deal. Through her office window, Celeste could see protesters gathered outside Williams Tech's main building. Some carried signs supporting her, others demanded justice for the financial crimes. Media vans lined the street, and reporters were interviewing anyone willing to talk about the scandal. Richard had tried calling her 17 times since Sunday night. She hadn't answered any of the calls. There was nothing left to say between them. Their marriage was over, their business partnership was finished, and their personal relationship was destroyed beyond repair. Nicole brought her another update. Patricia's employer fired her and filed a police report about the money she stole. Her apartment management company is evicting her. And her friends are all giving interviews to reporters, saying they barely knew her. The speed at which Patricia's life was falling apart was almost shocking. 3 days ago, she had been living in luxury, supported by Richard's stolen money and convinced that she was about to become the wife of a billionaire. Now she was in jail, unemployed, homeless, and facing serious criminal charges. Celeste felt no sympathy for her. Patricia had made her choices. She had chosen to have an affair with a married man. She had chosen to steal money from her employer. She had chosen to publicly humiliate and assault someone she thought couldn't fight back. Every consequence she was facing was the direct result of her own actions. Richard's situation was equally devastating. The board of directors had voted unanimously to remove him from all positions at Williams Tech. Several major clients had canceled their contracts, not wanting to be associated with a company involved in financial fraud. His reputation in Silicon Valley was destroyed overnight. He's been calling investors, trying to explain his side of the story, Nicole reported. But nobody wants to hear from him. 3 venture capital firms have already issued statements distancing themselves from anything Richard related. The tech community was small and gossip traveled fast. Everyone knew that Celeste Williams was the real genius behind Williams Tech's success. Richard had been riding on her innovations for years, taking credit for work he didn't do and making deals based on technology he didn't understand. Now that the truth was coming out, his professional network was abandoning him completely. Celeste's phone rang. It was Robert Chin, their biggest investor. She answered immediately. "Celeste, I just wanted to call and express my full support," Robert said. "The board is meeting this afternoon to discuss restructuring the company leadership. We'd like you to consider taking over as CEO officially." It was an offer Celeste had been hoping for. She had always been the real leader of Williams Tech, but Richard had held the official titles. Now she would have the recognition she deserved, along with complete control over the company she had built. "I accept," she said without hesitation. "I'll be at the board meeting this afternoon." After she hung up, Amanda Foster delivered more good news. The divorce papers were served to Richard this morning. "Since you have documented proof of his adultery and financial crimes, this should be a straightforward process. You'll keep all your separate property, including your patents and intellectual property rights." Everything was proceeding exactly as Celeste had planned. Richard and Patricia had thought they were so clever, sneaking around behind her back and stealing her money. They had underestimated her intelligence, her resources, and her determination to protect what was rightfully hers. Later that afternoon, Celeste walked into the Williams Tech boardroom as the new CEO and majority owner of her own company. The board members welcomed her with applause and unanimous support. For the first time in months, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his lawyer's office, trying to figure out how to avoid prison time. His affair with Patricia had cost him his marriage, his business, his reputation, and possibly his freedom. The woman he thought he could manipulate and control had outmaneuvered him completely. Patricia remained in jail, unable to make bail and facing trial for multiple felonies. The glamorous lifestyle she had been living was revealed to be built on stolen money and lies. The man she thought would leave his wife for her had abandoned her the moment things got difficult. Both of them were learning a lesson that Celeste had known all along. Actions have consequences and some mistakes can't be undone. As Celeste sat in her new corner office, looking out at the city that would soon know her as one of its most successful businesswomen, she felt a deep satisfaction. She had taken back control of her life and her company. She had exposed the truth about Richard and Patricia's crimes. And she had done it all without compromising her integrity or stooping to their level. The revenge was complete, but it was just the beginning of Celeste's new chapter. 2 weeks after the restaurant incident, Patricia Hartwell sat in a concrete cell wearing an orange jumpsuit, staring at the ceiling and wondering how her life had gone so wrong so quickly. Her cellmate was a woman named Rita who had been arrested for check fraud and seemed to find Patricia's situation hilarious. "So let me get this straight," Rita said for the 10th time. "You slapped a billionaire's wife in front of cameras and thought nothing bad would happen? Girl, you might be the dumbest person I ever met." Patricia turned away, but she couldn't escape the truth. Every decision she had made over the past year had been catastrophically wrong. The affair with Richard, the stolen money, the public confrontation with Celeste, each choice had led her deeper into a hole she couldn't climb out of. Her public defender, a tired-looking man named Steve Martinez, had been brutally honest about her chances. "The assault charge alone could get you 6 months, he explained during their brief meeting. "But the embezzlement charges are more serious. You're looking at possibly 3 to 5 years in prison." 3 to 5 years. In prison. 3 to 5 years. Patricia was 26 years old. She would be 30 when she got out, with a criminal record and no money. The life she had been building with Richard's stolen funds would be nothing but a memory. Meanwhile, Richard was discovering that being wealthy meant nothing when everyone knew you were a criminal. His penthouse apartment felt like a prison. Former friends refused to take his calls. Business associates acted like they had never met him. Even the doorman at his building looked at him with disgust. He had tried to contact Patricia several times, but her public defender advised her not to speak with him. Their relationship, which had seemed so passionate and exciting when it was secret, had turned into a liability for both of them. They were each facing criminal charges, and any contact between them could be used as evidence by prosecutors. Richard's expensive defense lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, delivered more bad news during their weekly meeting. The FBI has built a very strong case against you. They have bank records, security camera footage, witness statements, and physical evidence of forged documents. My advice is to take the plea deal. What kind of plea deal? Richard asked. 18 months in federal prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution to Williams Tech. That's $2.3 million, Richard. If you go to trial and lose, you could be looking at 8 to 10 years. The number hit Richard like a physical blow. $2.3 million. That was more money than he had left after Celeste seized the company assets. He would have to sell his car, his apartment, everything he owned just to begin paying back what he had stolen. His social circle had completely abandoned him. The poker games he used to attend were no longer open to him. The exclusive clubs where he used to network had quietly suggested he find somewhere else to spend his time. Former business partners crossed the street to avoid having to speak with him. The isolation was crushing. 4 years, Richard had defined himself by his social connections and business relationships. Without those, he felt like he didn't exist. He spent most days alone in his apartment, drinking expensive wine and reading news articles about his own downfall. Patricia's isolation was even more complete. Her family had disowned her after the scandal broke. Her mother, a religious woman from Ohio, had told reporters that she was ashamed and heartbroken by her daughter's behavior. Her few friends had all given interviews distancing themselves from her actions. I barely knew Patricia, her former roommate told a local news station. She was always talking about getting rich quick and finding a man to take care of her. I guess she thought she found one. The comments on social media were brutal. People called Patricia names that made her cry when she read them on the jail's computer during her limited internet time. The video of her slapping Celeste had become a meme, with people making jokes about entitled women getting what they deserved. What hurt the most was seeing how much support Celeste was receiving. News articles painted her as a brilliant innovator who had been betrayed by the people closest to her. Women's groups were holding her up as an example of someone who had fought back against injustice and won. Patricia realized that she had completely misunderstood the situation from the beginning. She had thought Celeste was some nobody who didn't deserve Richard's attention. Instead, Celeste was more successful, more intelligent, and more respected than Patricia could ever hope to be. In her darkest moments, Patricia wondered if Richard had ever really loved her or if she had just been convenient. Looking back, she could see that he had never made any real effort to leave his wife. He had made promises and bought gifts, but he had never actually taken steps to build a future with her. Richard was having similar realizations about himself. His affair with Patricia hadn't been about love, it had been about ego and excitement. He had enjoyed the thrill of sneaking around and the flattery of a younger woman who seemed impressed by his success. But when real consequences arrived, he had no desire to sacrifice anything meaningful for her. Both of them were learning that actions have prices, and some prices are higher than you expect to pay. They had both gambled with other people's lives and money, and they had both lost everything that mattered. As the days passed, their isolation deepened. They had burned bridges that couldn't be rebuilt, made enemies of people who had once supported them, and destroyed reputations that had taken years to build. The lesson was clear. When you betray someone who has the power to fight back, you better be prepared for the war that follows. 6 months after the restaurant incident, Celeste Williams stood at the podium of the Silicon Valley Women in Tech Conference, addressing an audience of 800 entrepreneurs, engineers, and investors. The applause when she was introduced lasted nearly 2 minutes. She was no longer known as Richard Williams' wife. She was Celeste Williams, CEO and founder of Williams Tech. 6 months ago, I learned a valuable lesson about trust and betrayal, she began, her voice clear and confident. But more importantly, I learned that when someone tries to tear down what you've built, you have 2 choices. Let them destroy you or rebuild something even stronger. The audience hung on every word. Celeste's story had become legendary in tech circles not just because of the dramatic restaurant confrontation, but because of how brilliantly she had handled the aftermath. Under her leadership, Williams Tech had not only survived the scandal but had thrived beyond anyone's expectations. Today, I'm announcing the launch of the Celeste Williams Foundation, she continued. We will provide legal support, financial resources, and technology training for women who have been betrayed by business partners or spouses. No woman should have to rebuild her life alone. The foundation was funded by the money Richard had stolen from their company. Instead of keeping it as personal compensation, Celeste had decided to use it to help other women in similar situations. The irony was perfect. Richard's betrayal would now fund other women's empowerment. Nicole, now promoted to chief operating officer, watched from the front row with pride. She had been with Celeste through the darkest days of the scandal and had seen her boss transform from a betrayed wife into one of the most powerful women in Silicon Valley. After the conference, Celeste drove to her new office building, a gleaming tower in downtown San Francisco that housed Williams Tech's expanded operations. The company had grown by 40% since she took over as CEO. Major clients who had initially fled because of Richard's scandal had returned when they realized the true talent behind the company's innovations. Her assistant brought her the latest updates on Richard and Patricia's legal situations. Richard had accepted the plea deal and would begin serving his 18-month sentence next week. Patricia had been convicted on all charges and sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Both of them would face years of probation and financial penalties that would take decades to pay off. Celeste felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but she felt justice had been served. They had made choices that hurt innocent people, and now they were facing the consequences of those choices. Her focus was on building something positive from the wreckage they had left behind. The foundation's first recipients were already being selected. Women who had discovered financial fraud by business partners. Wives who had found out their husbands were stealing from joint accounts. Female entrepreneurs who had been cheated out of their own companies by male co-founders. Each case reminded Celeste that her experience, while painful, was not unique. "Mrs. Williams," Nicole interrupted her thoughts, "there's someone here to see you. Says he's from Stanford Business School." The visitor was Dr. Marcus Thompson, a professor who taught courses on business ethics and corporate governance. He wanted to interview Celeste for a case study he was developing about how to handle financial fraud and corporate betrayal. "Your response to the crisis has become a model for how to protect yourself and your business interests," Dr. Thompson explained. "The way you documented everything, built a legal case, and maintained control of your company assets, it's exactly what we try to teach our students to do." Celeste agreed to participate in the case study. She wanted other women to learn from her experience, to understand that they had more power than they might realize when faced with betrayal and fraud. That evening, Celeste attended a charity gala for victims of domestic violence. She had started supporting the organization after realizing that financial abuse was often connected to other forms of domestic abuse. Many women stayed in bad relationships because they had been cut off from financial resources. At the gala, she met Dr. James Mitchell, a psychology professor who specialized in helping people recover from trauma and betrayal. He was intelligent, kind, and genuinely interested in her work with the foundation. When he asked if she would like to have dinner sometime to discuss their shared interests, she surprised herself by saying yes. It was the first time since her divorce that Celeste had considered dating anyone. She wasn't looking for romance, she was too focused on her business and her foundation for that. But she was open to meeting new people who shared her values and interests. As she drove home to her new house in the hills above San Francisco, Celeste reflected on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been living a lie, married to a man who was stealing from her and cheating on her. She had been successful professionally but powerless personally. Now she controlled her own destiny. She owned her company completely, led a foundation that was helping other women, and had rebuilt her life exactly the way she wanted it. The betrayal that had initially seemed like the worst thing that could happen to her had actually freed her to become the person she was meant to be. The revenge against Richard and Patricia had been satisfying, but the rebuilding of her own life was even better. She had proven that the best response to betrayal wasn't just to destroy your enemies, it was to build something so much better that their treachery became irrelevant. Celeste Williams had not just survived her husband's betrayal. She had used it as fuel to become stronger, more successful, and more independent than she had ever been before. 1 year after the restaurant slap that changed everything, Celeste Williams stood on the stage at the International Technology Innovation Awards, holding the trophy for Entrepreneur of the Year. The crowd of technology leaders, investors, and innovators gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. "This award represents more than personal achievement," Celeste said into the microphone, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium in San Francisco. "It represents what happens when women refuse to be silenced, refuse to be cheated, and refuse to let others take credit for their work." In the audience, hundreds of people recorded her speech on their phones. The tech world had embraced Celeste as a symbol of justice and female empowerment. Her story had inspired countless women to start their own companies, protect their intellectual property, and stand up to partners who tried to diminish their contributions. Williams Tech was now valued at $4 billion, double what it had been worth when Richard was involved. Celeste had released 3 groundbreaking software products in the past year, each one solving problems that other companies had struggled with for decades. Without Richard's interference and mismanagement, her innovations could finally reach their full potential. The Celeste Williams Foundation had helped over 300 women in its first year. They provided legal aid, financial support, and business mentoring to women who had been betrayed by business partners or spouses. The foundation's success stories were regularly featured in business magazines and news programs. Nicole, now the foundation's executive director in addition to her role at Williams Tech, managed a staff of 20 employees who worked with women across the country. The foundation had opened offices in 5 major cities and was planning to expand internationally. The requests for help keep increasing, Nicole reported during their weekly meeting. Women are finally understanding that they don't have to accept financial abuse or business betrayal. They're fighting back. After the awards ceremony, Celeste attended the reception where she was approached by dozens of investors, entrepreneurs, and reporters. Everyone wanted to talk to the woman who had turned her personal betrayal into a business empire and social movement. Dr. James Mitchell was at the reception, having flown in from Boston where he was presenting his research on trauma recovery at Harvard Medical School. He and Celeste had been dating for 6 months, taking things slowly while both focused on their careers. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine friendship. "I'm proud of you," James told her as they found a quiet corner away from the crowd. "Not just for the award but for everything you've built this year." Celeste smiled. For the first time in years she was truly happy. Her professional success felt meaningful because it was entirely her own. Her personal life was peaceful because it was built on honesty and trust. She had everything she had always wanted and she had achieved it on her own terms. Across town, Richard Williams sat in a halfway house where he was completing the final months of his federal sentence. He wore a maintenance worker's uniform and spent his days cleaning office buildings for minimum wage. His former life of luxury and respect felt like something that had happened to someone else. He had been following Celeste's success through news articles and social media posts. Each achievement she reached made his own fall from grace more painful. He had lost the most brilliant woman he had ever known, and for what? A few months of excitement with someone who had abandoned him the moment things got difficult. Richard's lawyer had managed to reduce his sentence to 15 months, but the real punishment was the total destruction of his reputation and relationships. Former friends acted like they had never met him. His parents had stopped taking his calls after the scandal broke. He would spend the rest of his life known as the man who betrayed Celeste Williams. Patricia's situation was even worse. She was serving her 3-year sentence in a state prison 2 hours outside Los Angeles. Her cellmate was a woman who had been convicted of armed robbery and had no sympathy for Patricia's complaints about the food or accommodations. "You brought this on yourself," the cellmate told her regularly. "Stop whining and do your time." Patricia spent her days working in the prison laundry and her evenings writing letters to lawyers, trying to find someone who would help her appeal her sentence. Every lawyer who reviewed her case told her the same thing. She had been recorded committing assault, and the evidence of her embezzlement was overwhelming. There was no basis for an appeal. She had tried writing to Richard several times, but he never responded. The man who had promised to take care of her had disappeared from her life completely. She was facing the consequences of their crimes alone while he was already planning his life after prison. Back at the awards reception, Celeste was approached by a producer from a major television network who wanted to create a documentary about her story. The producer explained that they wanted to show how Celeste had transformed a personal betrayal into a movement that was helping women across the country. "We want to focus on the positive," the producer said. "How you rebuilt your life, how you're helping other women, how you turned your pain into purpose." Celeste agreed to consider the documentary. Her story could help even more women understand that they had options when faced with betrayal and financial abuse. If her experience could prevent other women from suffering what she had gone through, then sharing it publicly would be worthwhile. As the evening wound down, Celeste looked around the room full of successful, innovative people who respected her work and valued her contributions. A year ago, she had been married to a man who stole from her and cheated on her. Tonight, she was being celebrated as one of the most important entrepreneurs of her generation. The transformation was complete. Celeste Williams had not just recovered from her husband's betrayal, she had used it as the foundation for building something greater than she had ever imagined possible. The best revenge, she had learned, was not destroying your enemies. The best revenge was becoming so successful that their betrayal became the catalyst for your greatest achievements. 18 months after the restaurant incident that changed her life, Celeste Williams stood in the boardroom of her newest acquisition, a small startup that created educational software for underprivileged communities. The purchase was part of her plan to expand Williams Tech's impact beyond just profitable software into technology that could change lives. This acquisition represents our commitment to using technology for social good, she explained to the team of young developers who had built the startup from nothing. You'll have unlimited resources to develop programs that can reach children who otherwise wouldn't have access to quality educational technology. The startup's founder, a young Latino woman named Sofia Rivera, looked like she might cry with relief and gratitude. She had been struggling to find investors who understood her vision of making education technology accessible to low-income communities. Celeste not only understood the vision but had the resources to make it reality. "Mrs. Williams, this means everything to us," Sofia said. "We've been bootstrapping this company for 3 years, sleeping on couches and eating ramen noodles. Now we can actually hire staff and expand our programs." Celeste remembered what it felt like to have a vision that others couldn't see or wouldn't support. Before Richard entered her life, she had been a young black woman with revolutionary ideas and no connections. She had succeeded through pure talent and determination, but she knew how much easier it could have been with the right support. The Williams Tech Foundation now operated in 12 cities and had helped over 800 women escape financial abuse or recover from business betrayal. The foundation's legal clinic had recovered over $15 million in stolen assets for their clients. Their business mentoring program had helped launch 63 successful companies. Nicole walked into the boardroom with an update on their latest project. "The documentary is scheduled to air next month," she reported. "The producer says early screenings are getting incredible responses. They think it could win an Emmy." The documentary, titled Rebuilding, The Celeste Williams Story, had taken 8 months to complete. It followed Celeste's journey from betrayed wife to successful CEO, but it also highlighted the stories of other women who had used the foundation's resources to rebuild their lives. That evening, Celeste had dinner with James at a quiet restaurant in Napa Valley. They had been dating for over a year now, and their relationship had developed into something deep and meaningful. James understood her drive and ambition, while she appreciated his kindness and emotional intelligence. "I have something to tell you," James said as they shared dessert. "Harvard offered me a permanent position. I'd be directing their new Center for Trauma Recovery and Resilience." Celeste felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. "That's amazing. It's exactly the kind of work you've always wanted to do." "It is," James agreed. "But it would mean moving to Boston. I wanted to talk to you about it before I made any decisions." They had reached a point where major life decisions affected both of them. Celeste realized that she wanted James to take the job because it would make him happy, but she also wanted to find a way to make their relationship work despite the distance. "What if I opened a Williams Tech office in Boston?" she suggested. "We've been talking about expanding to the East Coast anyway. I could split my time between San Francisco and Boston." James smiled. "You'd really consider that?" "I'd consider anything that lets us build a life together," Celeste replied. "I've learned that success means nothing if you don't have people you care about to share it with." It was a lesson she had learned the hard way. During her marriage to Richard, she had been successful professionally but miserable personally. Now she had both success and happiness, and she wasn't willing to sacrifice either one. 2 weeks later, Celeste received a call from her lawyer with news about Richard and Patricia. Richard had been released from federal prison and was living in a small apartment in Oakland, working as a freelance consultant for small tech companies. His criminal record made it impossible for him to get hired by any major firms. Patricia had been released after serving 2 years of her 3-year sentence. She was living with her aunt in Ohio and working at a call center for $8 an hour. Both of them were required to pay restitution for their crimes, payments that would continue for the next 15 years. "They both tried to contact you," the lawyer reported. "Richard sent a letter asking if you would consider hiring him as a consultant. Patricia's lawyer inquired about whether you'd be willing to provide a character reference for her parole officer." Celeste didn't hesitate in her response. No contact with either of them. They made their choices and now they have to live with the consequences. She felt no anger toward them anymore, but she also felt no obligation to help them recover from problems they had created themselves. Her energy was focused on building positive things, not rescuing people who had betrayed her trust. The Williams Tech IPO was scheduled for the following year. Investment bankers projected that the company could be worth $8 billion as a public entity. Celeste would become one of the wealthiest self-made women in America, but more importantly, she would have the resources to expand her foundation's work globally. We could help women in developing countries start tech companies, she explained to Nicole as they planned the foundation's international expansion. Imagine the impact if we could reach women in places where they have even fewer opportunities than we do here. As Celeste looked out the window of her corner office at the San Francisco skyline, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 2 years ago, she had been living a lie, married to a man who was stealing from her and planning to leave her for someone else. She had been successful but not fulfilled, wealthy but not truly free. Now she controlled her own destiny completely. She had built a business empire based on her own innovations. She had created a foundation that was changing lives every day. She had found love with someone who respected her intelligence and supported her ambitions. The restaurant slap that had seemed like a humiliation at the time had actually been the moment her real life began. Patricia's assault had given Celeste the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth about Richard's crimes and take control of her own story. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Celeste Williams had learned that betrayal could be a gift if you were strong enough to unwrap it and use what you found inside to build something better. As she prepared to leave the office for another dinner with James, Celeste smiled at the realization that her story was just beginning. The revenge was complete, the rebuilding was finished, and now the real adventure could start.